The confusion, coupled with crowded evacuation routes, seemed to make President Eisenhower's case for the interstate highway system. When the IHS began in earnest, a facility was created in central Illinois to evaluate pavement, road standards, and construction techniques. The Department of Defense contributed equipment and personnel for the tests. Military leaders knew from their experiences in World Wars I and II that roads were vital to national defense, because in World War I, military trucks destroyed roads. And in World War II, the lack of road standards sometimes impeded timely delivery. Over a 2-year period, Army trucks drove 17 million miles on the test roads. Some vehicles carried blocks of concrete to see how long a 24-ton truck would take to destroy roads and bridges. Highway building and maintenance standards were developed from these tests. But Eisenhower wanted more funds to be dedicated to really make it feasible to complete the interstate system. In his State of the Union speech in January 1956, Eisenhower tried again. The Bureau of Public Roads issued a book, General Location of National System of Interstate Highways, that showed where the interstates would be located around the nation's largest metropolitan areas. With Eisenhower standing firm for legislation to create the interstate system, Congress went back to work on it and finally produced legislation that called for 90% federal funding, with money coming from a highway trust fund that received the revenue from the federal gasoline tax. The final version showed a compromise on how the funds would be appropriated among states, and it had provisions on uniform design standards, inclusion of existing toll roads, and the wage rate to be paid on those federal construction projects. It also allowed use of federal funds to purchase right-of-ways for the roads and allowed 2-lane segments, but later legislation required all parts of the system to be 4-lane, limited access highways. The Senate and the House gave final approval to the compromise version and sent it to Eisenhower on June 26, 1956. He signed it privately, without ceremony, in the Walter Reed Army Hospital where he was recovering from an intestinal ailment. When it passed, $25 billion was authorized for fiscal years 1957 through 1969 to create a network of 41,000 miles. Because of the 1956 law and the subsequent Highway Act of 1958, the pattern of community development in America was fundamentally altered and based on the automobile. Well, like I said earlier, the interstate system was developed largely due to Cold War fears and making it possible for massive evacuation from urban areas in the event of a nuclear attack. It also contributed to other types of national defense. For example, throughout the interstate system, there were mile-long stretches of concrete pavement that doubled as emergency landing strips for military aircraft. Now there were runways all over the United States. Many Army posts, especially where division-level units were garrisoned, are near interstate highways. For example, the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley, Kansas, is close to I-70, and the 1st Armored Division at Fort Bliss, Texas, is close to I-10. The interstate system has been used to mobilize troops before. During Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, the interstate system contributed to the success of mobilizing the military for war in the Middle East. Well, it took longer than planned to complete the interstate system. Author Tom Lewis notes that it took 40 years, not 13 as specified by the legislation President Eisenhower signed in 1956, to build the interstate highway system. The Bureau of Public Roads became part of the Federal Highway Administration, formed in 1967, as part of the U.S. Department of Transportation. When it was finally completed in 1991, the interstate was, according to Lewis, the largest engineered structure in the world. All right, so what has been the impact of the interstate system? The system today that was envisioned in the 1930s, then was implemented in the 1950s, and then completed 50 years later, has had a huge impact on the development of the United States. The interstates have spurred and speeded the development of commerce throughout the country and abroad. Trucks, which took several weeks to get across the continent, can now move across it in a few days, transporting durable goods and mail to fresh produce and anything else. They've increased the mobility of all Americans, allowing them to move out of the cities and establish homes in growing suburbia and even farther from their workplaces, and to travel quickly from one region to another for vacation and business. You can see this in the design of most American cities, where urban cores, up until about the 1920s and 1930s, are very densely packed together. Some cities, such as Kansas City, might be more spread out if they had good urban railway or tramway systems, but from the 1950s onward, this is when you see suburbia extend outward like a supernova from the original urban core from the early 20th century. But interstates also created more automobile dependency, smog, and increased congestion. The increasingly outward bound the shift to suburbs has caused a drop in population densities of urban areas, and the ease of long distance travel on high speed limited access highways has contributed to the decline of mass transit. Compared to Europe, far less mass transit is used in the United States. Some would argue that our lower population density is a better explanation for this, but it's hard to say that the automobile isn't a cause for this as well. But whatever its merits, the interstate system is the 20th century version of the railway system, which was the chief infrastructure project of the 19th century, or the Erie Canal, which was the chief infrastructure project of the early 19th century. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush redesignated the interstate system as the Dwight D. Eisenhower National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. Today, the system consists of about 47,000 miles of completed highway, and the cost of total construction in 2016 dollars was about $526 billion. And just to round out this episode, I wanted to mention some of the other effects of the interstate highway system. This comes from an executive summary by Wendell Cox and Gene Love called 40 Years of the U.S. Interstate Highway System, an Analysis, the Best Investment a Nation Ever Made. Quite strong statement right there. The point being that without a first-class system of interstate highways, life in America would have been far different. It'd be more risky, lack the efficiency and comfort that Americans enjoy and take for granted in crossing the continent easily. People would be more crowded into densely packed inner cities. Intercity travel would occur less often and be more cumbersome. Rate charges would be higher, and as a result, so would prices. According to some estimates, based on the increased safety of the interstate system, it saved the lives of at least 187,000 people, if you assume that driving conditions would be more like cities and cramped, congested areas. It's prevented injuries to nearly 12 million. It's returned more than $6 in economic productivity for each dollar invested, and has enhanced international security for the military defense reasons that I mentioned. On a more negative note, building the interstate consumed thousands of acres of land with wide right-of-ways consumed, leading to the demolition of historical structures, and in some locations replaced existing roadways. It dramatically affected older general access roads with similar alignments. Traveling at lower speeds and lined by businesses with direct access to the roadway, such roads were characterized by distinct vernacular architecture, thinking like roadside cottage colonies. But the construction of the interstate highway system fundamentally altered this pattern of commercial development as long-distance travelers abandoned these former routes, leaving towns whose economies were based on travelers coming through fading into obscurity. Busy roadside stores and restaurants struggled to make ends meet, and the effects of towns in the Old West that basically shut down when railroads didn't go by them happened to towns in the 20th century when interstates caused smaller towns to lose all the traffic that once went through it. Fast interstate travel also caused the death knell of short-haul train travel and completed the process of making cars supreme in American culture. New roadside developments near interstate highways were focused at interchanges because design of these limited access highways prohibited businesses from having direct access to the highway itself. Interchanges are unique to highways and have evolved into three-dimensional engineered structures that are distinct from the grade-level junctions of traditional roadways. The goal was to keep traffic moving, and with cloverleaf designs, no one ever needed to make a left turn across traffic. There was little space available around the interchanges, and land there became extremely valuable, limiting the diversity of businesses to only those with a lot of money. Gas stations, shopping malls, national and regional chains. So the result is that there was more uniform cookie-cutter architecture that replaced regionally distinctive designs that used to be on American roadways. So with the rise of destination shopping malls in the 70s and 80s, located at highway interchanges, and the demise of Main Street, and the construction of the interstate highway system all occurred in the same 25-year period. Some would argue that the interstate highways both encouraged and were the result of the commuting lifestyle, the loss of a land ethic, and the divorce of the workplace from the home. In the past, what would have once been an intolerably long commute on winding roads became doable on the interstate, and this psychologically opened up huge amounts of agricultural land within driving distance of American cities for development. And this is true in the United States when, for most Americans, this is more anecdotal, but Driving 1 to 2 hours doesn't seem terribly daunting, or many people have done 8 or 10-hour drives. If you talk to people in Europe or other countries, that's not something that they would really think of doing in a day, an 8 or 10-hour drive. Maybe the familiarity with the automobile and vast interstates is something that has affected the psychology of distance as well. So interstate highways change people's perceptions of landscape. With uniformity of road design allowing for long-distance travel between major cities at high speeds, travel on an interstate is a landscape blurring experience and can seem more homogeneous than going on secondary roads that actually go through towns. Hey everyone, Scott here. One more brief word from our sponsors. The point of an interstate system is to get people from point A to point B as quickly as possible, not to immerse people in local culture. So you're not going to have something as romantic as a Route 66 as you would have on a trans-continental highway. Some have critiqued the interstate system as creating a standardized, homogenized design in America and the homogeneity of development, resulting in, some would say, the blanding of America. So as you can see, the interstate system has its advocates, noting that it's increased safety, it's made it more feasible to get around the United States, it's increased national security, it's been a great economic development. Others would say it's led to architectural blandness, where everything is homogenized down to what a few large corporations can afford to put on clover leaves, and distinct architectural features that used to line American roadways are now mostly gone. So there you go. That is the mixed history of the American interstate system. All right, that is today's episode. As always, I want to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, especially our spy masters, Todd Warren, Jake Harrington, Beverly Engel, Bill Ivey, Joyce Norman, Tyler from Colorado, Josh Reddick, Baron Fraser, Chris from Maine, Carl from Norway, Moondoggy from Ohio, Rick Knowlton, Vic and Irene, Mike from New York, Michelle, and Marlene. I'll explain what that is in a second. If you like the show and want to help it grow, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, like and subscribe to the show on the podcast player of your choice. This helps spread the word about the show. 2, join our Facebook group. Here we can keep the discussion going about new episodes, and you can talk about what you like and didn't like. And you can find this group if you just search for History Unplugged on Facebook. 3, we have an online store with t-shirts, phone covers, and other accessories featuring awesomely bad history puns that were crowdsourced by you, the audience. And you can find that if you go to public.com and look for History Unplugged, or you just go to historyonthenet.com and look for our store there. 4, and this is really the best way to dive deep with History Unplugged, and that's to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you know your American history, you know the Knowlton's Rangers were an elite spy and reconnaissance group in the American Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the membership program of History Unplugged. You can join at 3 levels. If you join at the level of Scout, you can hear all the episodes of History Unplugged completely ad-free and get early access to new episodes, at least a week early. If you join at the Intelligence Officer level, you get special bonus episodes, like a 10-part series on the World War II hero Audie Murphy, a multi-part series called Ottoman Lives about different people in the Ottoman Empire, and a series called Rendezvous with Death that looks at biographical profiles of Americans who went to fight in World War I before America entered the war. The last level is Spy Master, where you get all that stuff, but you also get 3 hardcover history books, Forging a President, How the Wild West Created Teddy Roosevelt, Race to the Top of the World, Richard Byrd and the First Flight to the North Pole, and The Last Fighter Pilot, the true story of the final combat mission of World War II. Another bonus is, you can choose a history topic for me to focus on for an entire episode that can go up to an hour, and I'll answer whatever question you have for me, and you get a shout out at the end of each episode. If you want to learn how to become a member of the Knowlton's Rangers, go to patreon.com/unplugged. That's patreon.com/unplugged. All right, well, that is all for my spiel. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast, from ancient Greece to the Cold War and everything else in between. See you next time.